My name is Abigail, and at the beginning of last year I allowed myself too much. The festive feasts seemed to weave a network of exquisite temptations around me. One day I realized that the 5 extra pounds didn't just stick to me, but became part of my daily struggle. Now, at 49, I feel the weight of these accumulated pleasures, and with unprecedented determination I decided to get rid of them in order to immerse myself in the festive season with a light heart. The plan was simple: to lose the extra pounds before the holidays, so that when the garlands light up and the house is filled with the scent of ginger, I could afford to enjoy myself without thinking about the consequences. Yes, it all sounded great on paper, but in reality it seemed as if fate itself was testing my strength. The approach of Christmas was already felt around. Coffee shops were full of the smell of cinnamon, and the windows were tempting with chocolates promising moments of sweet bliss. This is a happy problem, I reminded myself with a slight smile, but my thoughts were already taking me further, to the very sweets that I would most likely buy for Valentine's Day, no matter what. But today I want to tell you a completely different story, one of those that warm the soul on winter evenings. This is a story about a time when I was 28 years old. My then boyfriend David and I, who had been dating for several years, finally decided to get engaged. That winter day, I was happy to introduce him to his parents. They received him warmly and with sincere joy, and I was sure that everything would go smoothly. David charmed them immediately, and I felt genuine approval of their views. This day was supposed to be a symbol of our future happiness, but not everything turned out the way I wanted. Everything changed when my older sister Laura came home from work. She was only 3 years older than me, but there was always an invisible line between us, something untouchable, known only to both of us. Laura, tired after a long day, slowly, as if with belated realization, turned her gaze to David. She immediately hooked her gaze on him like a fish on a hook. It was a strange feeling, almost mystical. I felt a spark pierce her as soon as their eyes met. I would call it intuition, sisterly instinct, but I could hardly describe it more accurately. Laura greeted David, and I noticed how red her cheeks were when she held out her hand to him. Her gaze, ordinary, was suddenly filled with something painfully familiar, but at the same time alien, longing, like a spicy smell from the first sip of wine. I quietly hoped that it was just a fleeting impulse, a flash that would go out as quickly as it appeared. But she continued to hold his hand a little longer than necessary, as if her fingers did not want to let go of this elusive but tangible thread. Even when she was talking to him, there was something dreamy, ghostly in her eyes. I tried not to notice what was happening, suppressing the anxiety rising in my throat. Deep down, I believed that my sister might not have realized what feelings were fluttering in her heart. Maybe it was something fleeting, a trick of the imagination. Emotions are elusive and sometimes difficult to control, and I decided to leave it to chance, let time put everything in its place. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. A few days after our visit, Laura insisted that I should break off the engagement. She looked at me with such a serious expression, as if she was talking about something inevitably important. According to her, David was a womanizer and would only bring me disappointment over time. She assured me that I deserved better and that my feelings for him blinded me, deprived me of sanity. I tried to figure out what her conclusions were based on, but Laura didn't give a single concrete reason other than her intuition. A woman's intuition, she said, as if that said it all. Her words struck a chord with me. I looked at her, trying to figure out where this conviction came from, and only felt a growing bewilderment inside. My older sister, who had never been in a long-term relationship herself, suddenly declared that she knew more about men than I did. I decided that I had to trust David, because his character, his restraint and kindness, accumulated over the years, inspired me with a sense of confidence. Despite Laura's alarming warnings, I put my doubts aside. Maybe my sister was passionate, maybe she wanted something she couldn't get otherwise, but I saw no reason to react to her outbursts. David was a straightforward and honest man, and it seemed to me that he would not participate in this playful game, no matter how tempting its scenario might seem. David started coming to our house more often. He always said that he wanted to build a strong relationship with my family, especially considering his intentions to marry me. I felt comfortable when he was around my parents. Their approval meant a lot to me, and it was nice to see how David sincerely aspired to be a part of our lives. His parents seemed happy about these changes, and even his mother, who was sometimes strict in her grades, was satisfied with his behavior. I hoped that David would get along with my family so that this communication could become a natural and unsophisticated continuation of our lives. However, Laura apparently saw the situation differently. Her attempts to get closer to David began to go beyond the bounds of what was allowed. Once, while I was away, she, according to David, almost intentionally came too close to him, and at the same time her breasts lightly touched his shoulder. She clung to him as if by accident, but there was a special urgency in her touch. "Don't you think Abigail is a little childish sometimes?" she asked, looking closely at his face. David, a little embarrassed by such direct pressure, did not comment, but later admitted to me that he was somewhat amused by his shamelessness. The situation, however, was not limited to a one-time incident. Laura began to ask David more and more questions, to take contact details from him, sometimes even clearly flirting. Once, intentionally or accidentally, she stumbled so that her short dress lifted, exposing the lace of her underwear. David, staring at her with an expression of mild surprise, could barely restrain himself from laughing. It seemed to him like a kind of cheap comedy, but he was calm because he knew that his heart and mind belonged to me. Laura seemed to believe that she could win him over to her side. Perhaps in her eyes, David, being my fiancé, could not reject her outright, since she was my sister. She approached him with special languor, uttering greetings in a whisper, almost like love words. But most of all, of course, she was worried about David's social status. Working for a large company with a good reputation made him even more attractive in her eyes. One day, watching David talking enthusiastically with his father about business, Laura told me, "He's reliable. With such a person and with his professionalism, he will be able to provide you with stability for many years to come." She looked at him with such sincere affection that I even felt a little pity, as if she were a girl confused in her dreams. My parents, although they were watching what was happening, preferred not to interfere. In our family, all this was considered to be character traits, and many things were overlooked. Laura was the eldest daughter, and perhaps because of this, they always treated her with extreme caution, trying to smooth out her weaknesses and shortcomings. For example, Mom might have noticed with a smile that if Laura was assigned to heat up lunch, she would almost certainly use plastic dishes, which would immediately melt in the oven. Laura did not shine at school either. Her successes were modest, and sports activities often ended with her absence from training with vague excuses. Looking back, I realized that our upbringing was as different as we were from each other. I often had to take responsibility for her, not because it was necessary, but because my parents expected it from me. She was the object of their care and close attention, and perhaps this was due to their attraction to her and the desire to protect her in everything. On the contrary, I was often told not to stand out, to keep myself in the shadows. It wasn't fair, but as I got older, I realized that such differences had become part of my inner strength and independence. I was one of those who coped with any task quickly and accurately, and perhaps that was why my work was not considered particularly valuable in the family. All this made me learn early to help Laura, take her mistakes on myself and find balance where it was lacking. Sometimes I even had to pretend in public that I was less capable, just to avoid attracting too much attention. But over time, I realized that being a comfortable daughter does not mean being happy. I started to show more independence, and my sister didn't seem ready for it. It took her a while to realize that my support was no longer her mainstay, that I was no longer going to solve her problems. This caused a slight resentment in her soul, but our relationship, despite everything, remained warm. Sometimes I even shared advice with her when she was facing difficulties, and helped if her problems were serious. Our relationship was complicated, perhaps filled with hidden reproaches and unfulfilled expectations, but for me they always remained quite normal, as did our family itself. When David stopped noticing her looks, her casual touches and hints, a strange mixture of resentment and embarrassment boiled up in Laura's heart, which soon burst out. She seemed unable to accept that her younger sister had overtaken her at this important moment in her life. On the eve of the wedding, she decided on a revelation that seemed to split the family in two. Gathering in the living room, Laura suddenly, as if throwing a heavy stone into the air, confessed to her parents, "I just can't accept that Abigail is getting married before me." Her words filled the room with tension, like heavy smoke rising from a dying campfire. Her father tried to soften the situation by hugging her and gently saying, "Don't worry, Laura, you'll find your man soon too. Everything will be done in due time." I joined in his words, trying to support her and calm her anxiety. "You will definitely find someone who will be worthy of you," I said, trying to inspire her with confidence. But Laura just turned away, displeased. Her voice sounded low and broken. "Don't you see how unfair it is? Usually the older ones get married first, and the younger ones later. It's so natural, it should be like this, and suddenly, it's the other way around." She looked up at us, and there was a reflection of her deep inner pain in them, as if she was standing on the edge of an abyss. I reminded her that tomorrow was mine, that this was no reason to complain, but Laura continued to insist on her own, like a person unable to let go of the resentment that, like an ancient anchor, held her in the waters of her own insecurity. "Mom, do you care that I will remain a single older sister, while my younger sister will be happily married?" Her voice was full of bitterness, and I stood in the hallway listening to her accusations, feeling my heart gradually shrink with longing. The argument between Laura and her parents escalated, and soon words came out of her mouth that pierced the air like lightning. "We're not coming to the wedding tomorrow." I stood in the silence of the hallway, not believing my ears. How is this possible? My parents seemed fascinated by her words. They agreed not to attend my day, just to indulge her whims. Their decision was like a blow to the heart, as if they preferred her needs, however far-fetched, to my dreams. I tried to find an explanation for their actions, but everything looked so ridiculous that the only word suitable for it was betrayal. The wedding, which I had been waiting for so long, turned out to be a difficult ordeal. The whole night was spent in restless thoughts and endless questions. When dawn flooded the windows with light, my eyes were full of tears and anxiety, and my heart seemed empty. All I saw was Laura's satisfied smile, which she never hid when my parents informed her of their decision. At the ceremony, restraining my emotions, I stood next to David, but unfortunately, instead of enjoying the moment, I explained to him and his family why my parents did not come. It seemed humiliating, but at that moment I couldn't change anything. "I'm sorry," I whispered, lowering my voice so that no one would hear my words except them. "My family does not support this marriage. My sister can't stand that I'm leaving first, and my parents decided to stay with her." I tried to speak firmly, but the words struggled to break through the lump in my throat. An oppressive silence hung around us. The in-laws, having learned about this, were silent for a long time. The expressions on their faces were a mixture of surprise and compassion, as if they suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. Then my mother-in-law, with kindness and warmth, took my hand. Her touch was gentle, like the quiet evening wind, soothing in its touch. "Remember, your family is here," she said, as if to remind me that this day should not be overshadowed. She tried to bring joy back to me, and her support brought tears to my eyes. I buried my face in her shoulder, and at that moment, warm hugs surrounded me, David, his parents, everyone who was around. We became one, the very link that I had always dreamed of finding, and at that moment I felt like I was truly part of a new family. David, not wanting to see my tears, gently stroked my head. His gaze was full of tenderness and love. "Ashley," he said, whispering the words as if mesmerizing them forever, "I'm your husband now. So please stop saying that your family is not here." His voice sounded quiet and confident, penetrating my heart like a barely perceptible motif of a song familiar from childhood. My parents-in-law and David began to joke, trying to dispel the heavy mood, and laughed at the fact that I could ruin my makeup if I didn't hold back my tears. My mother-in-law looked at me with warm kindness in her eyes. Her soft features breathed care and understanding. "Ashley," she said, not letting go of my hand, "I know you have a difficult situation with your family, but today is the beginning of a new life. Let's start building our family, our own." Her words warmed me like a winter blanket, and her strong embrace gave me strength. David, my father-in-law and mother-in-law held me, and I felt the warmth of their love and care. I stopped at the word without blinking, carefully watching my sister's face, her smug confidence and expectation, which was read in every movement. David chuckled faintly, standing next to him, as if he saw something deeply ironic in this sentence. Her eyes flashed. She seemed to feel that she was about to get what she wanted, as if all her years of waiting and hidden envy would finally lead to a happy ending where David would become hers, now rightfully so. "Okay," I repeated, smiling modestly, pretending that I was really considering her absurd proposal. "I'll think about it." The words slipped from my lips like the spicy notes of an elaborate deception, and for a moment there was complete silence in the room. I didn't look away, and there was a flicker of concern in the depths of her eyes, whether she knew what feelings her request and her ridiculous belief in her own right to my husband had caused. "Yes," I thought. I continued with a touch of thoughtfulness, enduring a pause that made her lean forward a little in anticipation. David, seeing how the scene was developing, nodded imperceptibly, supporting me in my unexpected decision. He understood that my idea was nothing more than a quiet revenge, unnoticeable, but at the same time, as I hoped, extremely painful for her. Oh, how I wanted her to feel the abyss of despair that settled in my heart on our wedding day, when she caused a break with my parents, standing between us like an insurmountable shadow. I took a step forward, breaking the silence that still held us in silence. "Do you really want to be with David?" I repeated, as if confirming that her desire was now taking on a real form, but there was an inescapable gleam in my eyes, which slowly began to fade only when I caught something like doubt in her gaze. "Yes, I love him, and I always knew that he was the one I should be with," she said firmly, barely noticeably sticking out her chin, looking for support in the eyes of our parents, who stood as if complicit in this absurd scene. David shook his head, as if surprised at her boldness and confidence, as if she didn't realize how ridiculous her claim to a man who hardly had anything but casual sympathy for her looked. Laughing to himself, he whispered softly in my ear, "Remember how you joked about it once after our wedding? You said that if she had come and asked me, you would have agreed, just to see how she would handle our bully brood." And I remembered how much fun I had at that moment. Laughing, I imagined her with the children, who must be watched every minute, otherwise they would turn the house upside down. Laura stood there, discouraged and weakened, as if all her confidence had melted in an instant, replaced by genuine confusion. She glanced at her parents as if seeking their support, but their faces were stern, their gazes downcast, and none of them seemed to want to participate in her strange venture anymore. The bright colors of her dream of how easily she could get David were fading before her eyes. "David," pretending to lower his head as if collecting his thoughts, gave me a quick glance, and I caught a mischievous glow in his eyes, understanding and agreement with every word he had just uttered. His face remained serious, but I knew he was barely holding back a smile as he watched Laura's confusion. "Laura," he said, restrained but firm, "I think it's time to stop hoping for the impossible. The feelings that you've probably been hiding in your heart for so long won't find an answer. I've always respected you as a person and Ashley's sister, but I've never been able to see you any other way." Laura blinked, her lips twitched, and her expression changed from triumphant to confused. Her eyes became moist, but despite this, she was still trying to find support among her parents, now with an expression of despair. They stood side by side, but they were silent, as if they were tired of all this drama, of her endless claims and complaints, of her obsessive demands to get everything she wanted, even if it did not rightfully belong to her. "I can't believe this," she whispered faintly, her hands trembling as she raised them to her face, as if she hoped to erase all her embarrassment from it. She desperately tried to cling to the last hope, returning to her mother. "But you said that he loves me too. You've always supported me." Mom looked away, as if suddenly realizing the absurdity and inappropriateness of this situation. The father, with sadness in his voice, muttered, "Laura, we should never have gotten involved in this. You were a grown woman, you had enough time to find your happiness, but all you did was continue to harbor resentment and jealousy towards your sister. We were wrong to support you in this." Laura, not believing what she had heard, put her hands over her ears, trying to ignore her father's words, but it was clear that they were tearing her from the inside out. She took a step back, recoiling from them, as if she had been robbed of her last chance to fulfill her whims. David, at this moment, coldly but calmly added, "You must understand that neither I nor your family can be forced to support you in your mistakes and self-deceptions. We're not here to indulge your desires, Laura." Her face was contorted with anger, disappointment boiling in her eyes. As if she had found the last ray of power, she unleashed all her anger on me. "Ashley," she cried out, "you've always been my little sister, but you should have given in at least once. Can't you see how I'm suffering? It's not your right to be happy first." Her accusations fell like red-hot coals into the silence of the room. "The past years have taught me to appreciate the quiet course of life and every small detail of our family, from the laughter of children to cozy family evenings. It seems that time itself has generously decorated our days with many joyful moments. David, despite his job, always found time to support me and share the care of the children, and even when I was busy with household chores, I tried to leave warmth and attention for him, which, as I realized, are the most important part of family happiness. My children grew up and surprised us with their achievements and character. Our daughter, despite her young age, took care of her brothers, as if she had become a support for them and for us. She talked about the future, shared her dreams, and has already begun to make efforts to study and her hobbies. I saw her becoming more independent and confident every day, and it brought me a quiet but deep joy. And the sons are three restless and charming mischievous people who added dynamics to our house at every step, leaving behind bright, like flashes, traces of pranks. Sometimes it seemed to me that the walls of our house almost absorbed their noise, turning it into an echo that will always live here, even when they grow up and leave our house. In their laughing eyes, I saw the thirst for adventure that drove them to participate in local contests, dance performances, and their pride when they returned home with awards made us all incredibly happy. One evening, while I was cooking dinner, one of the boys, flushed and beaming, came up to me and announced that they were going to become famous artists. "We will be performing with Pearl Jam," he said loudly and enthusiastically. David and I couldn't help but smile as we imagined this unexpected and naive dream. But who knows? Maybe one day we'll actually be sitting among the audience watching our sons perform. We get together more and more often with our loved ones, family and friends, and our family has become even bigger than I could have imagined when I married David. Our evenings are full of laughter, pleasant conversations, and, of course, delicious food, which has now become a symbol of our meetings. It is even difficult for me to imagine how our lives would have turned out if I had once acted differently, if I had not accepted all the trials and difficulties that fell to our lot. Times are changing, and so are we. But I greet every new day with my family with gratitude, realizing that despite the many roads and changes we have traveled, we all stayed close, supporting and protecting each other. A quiet but strong light has settled in my heart, the light of love, care, and peace, which will not go out while we all continue our journey together.